All right, time now for Perspective, and today our guest is filmmaker Sue Clayton. In 2016, she made the documentary Calais Children, A Case to Answer, in the run-up to the infamous migrant jungle camp being destroyed. Today, the camp is gone, but the migrant crisis is far from over. Ms. Clayton, thank you very much for coming in to speak to us today at France 24. I wanted to begin by asking if it's a fair assessment to say this film really tracking the discrepancy between what the British government was saying and what happened on the ground in Calais.
Yeah, well, the British said they were going to take care of the children, but they just simply never did. And I was lucky enough that I'm well connected with some lawyers in England, human rights lawyers. They came for free, 10 of them, and we signed up as clients a whole number of the really vulnerable children, went back to the UK and said, please accept them. The government kept saying no. We went through all the courts, more courts and appeals and more courts. And then finally, the children were still not accepted, so we actually sued the Home Office in the High Court, and my film was the evidence, it was the witness statement. So I'm very proud to make a film that's able to forward our human rights position and say this is not acceptable.
And as you mentioned, suing the Home Office, Britain refusing to help them when these children had legal right to be in the UK. Many of them had family members in there who were expecting them to arrive.
That's right. I think there's a moral right. We've also had the Windrush crisis, which I'm sure your viewers will know about. People who were here many years ago from Jamaica who were invited here 60, 70 years ago. They've had problems getting their status. So I do think the UK has to be very careful and not pursue what it calls the hostile environment policy, and remember that we're signatory to international codes on human rights.
In the film, there are many portraits of these unaccompanied minors. There's Daniel, Jamal, Abdul, Akram. What about the other children you met? Do you know what's happened to them since you made this film?
Well, I made what was probably a reckless promise, but I've kept to it, which is I said all the children we met I would keep in touch with. They all have my phone number. They call me day and night when they really need help. Several of them, sadly, have tried to commit suicide because they're still stuck in France, but they have no status in France either. So I promised to keep in touch. Luckily, we did get some to UK, and some have settled and done really well.
Could you maybe explain to our viewers why so many of them are keen on making it to the UK? You mentioned they're stuck in France, but why is it the UK? Why is that where they want to go? Yeah,
well, globally, it's interesting. Globally, not millions are going to the UK. The British press would make you think every single refugee in the world is heading for the UK. In fact, they're not. But the ones who are going, it's partly because they have family members, and under the EU convention called the Dublin III regulation, they have every right to move once they're within Europe to those family members. And the other few hundred remaining, I think they often grew up learning English, or they grew up in ex-colonial situation where England was seen as the home country, or the place. One of the children called it Democracy House. They said, my name for England is Democracy House. They see it as a fair, reasonable place, and they like the football.
And so they never expected being in France. Now they're, in a way, stateless, being away from their home, being in a country they don't speak the language. And as you mentioned, some of them possibly trying to commit suicide because they don't see a future here.
Yeah, well, as long as they're under 18, they do have the right to come to the UK under either Dublin III or a British law called the Dubs Amendment, which is for children in Europe with no families. They just haven't been brought, and they know once they reach 18, their situation is even worse because they're not protected anymore as children. So Degana, one poor boy, you know, he actually on his 18th birthday cut his wrists and said, what do I do now? You know, I have no status anywhere. So it sounds for a film, it sounds like a tragic film, but I think what also comes across is they're so hopeful, they're so resilient, they keep such a sense of humour when they can. So in a way, I don't feel sorry for them exactly. I feel respect for these children. You know, they didn't choose to do this journey mostly. They were sent by families to escape danger. And
absolutely, a couple of stories about some of them seeking an education in the UK to help provide for their family back home. Tears of joy happening in the documentary as well. Why do you think Theresa May's government then made this promise to help them but didn't deliver on it?
Well, I think we're all caught up in the dreadful Brexit mess, and some days she's being nice with Europe and saying to Macron, and before that President Hollande, oh, of course we'll help and we're all going to work together. And then, of course, I think this is a consequence of the Brexit situation. She's somehow having to prove she's tough. But I don't think being tough, you should take that out on children.
Speaking about Brexit, you've worked very closely with these human rights lawyers, some of the activists on the ground in Calais, and after the migrants were relocated when it was destroyed in 2016. What do these activists say could be the aftermath of Brexit in regard to these migrants hoping to reach the UK?
Well, there are all sorts of conventions that the EU has, like the Dublin III regulation, that allows children to reach their families safely and not risk being trafficked and abused. And there are various European human rights conventions, and we're going to lose those. We're going to lose that protection. Lots of protections, not just for migrants, but for many of our own citizens, EU citizens in Britain. So it's not a great time at the moment. And also the whole of British Parliament has been preoccupied for 2 years with Brexit. And so lots of other serious issues are not being discussed.
A lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty remains ahead. What would you like to see the British government pledge in the moving forward to sort of get rid of some of that uncertainty?
Well, I just wish we could stay in Europe. I think the whole debate was very misleading. I don't think the Leave campaign presented their case fairly. In fact, they've been judged by various bodies in the UK to have acted unlawfully. So I long to stay, and I think this is a really important time that Europe stays together and that we act internationally on the refugee issue, on climate change, which is going to bring the next wave of refugees into Europe. And we really all need to be acting together. So I just hope things might become more amicable and peaceful again.
A message of solidarity. Thank you very much, Sue Clayton, filmmaker whose Calais Children documentary, A Case to Answer. You can find that documentary, a powerful, personal, human portrait of a migrant crisis that sometimes we don't have the time to cover, putting a face and a name on many of the people that you see in the headlines.